I won't be available tomorrow for the roundtable. I apologize for that, but I just got a doctor's appointment a couple of hours ago for tomorrow morning, which was a shocker, but I couldn't either that or wait a month and a half. So I'm sorry.
Understood, Glenn. We're going to have a very big crowd tomorrow.
I'm happy to hear that. That's one of the things I love about this community board, that you're proactive in things. It's not just reactive, and that's a biggie that you do for a community. So
I love this event. I love the nonprofits.
So just a bit of housekeeping before we start. If your mic is not on mute, please put it on mute. And if you're calling in, I believe mute is *69 to mute and *69 to unmute yourself.
All right, I have it as 6:30, I think. So
Yep.
Let's get rolling, hey?
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's Housing and Land Use Committee meeting of Community Board 14. We have a very busy agenda tonight, so we definitely need to get rolling here. Two important matters to discuss. Before I get to the first item, I do have to mention, and I know she is on board as well. I just need to thank our outgoing co-chair, Talisha Saintville, who has performed just an amazing service to get this committee off the ground and to get it and leave it in such a great spot. So just want to thank Talisha for all of your hard work. Just want to say hello. That that would be great as well.
Thank you, Talisha.
Thank you for that. Hello.
There you are. Okay, great. Okay, and I'd also like to welcome our new co-chair, Joanne Brown, who's coming on board, and of course is our former chair of the board. So welcome, Joanne, who will be handling the second matter tonight. So let's just jump into the first one here, because tonight we have first Anne-Marie Santiago, who is the Deputy Commissioner for the Office of Enforcement and Neighborhood Services at the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, or HPD. So she's here this evening for a presentation to discuss code enforcement and the ABCs of housing. So really, without any further ado, if you're ready, Anne-Marie, I'm going to turn it over to you at this point.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to your board meeting this evening. I am going to bring up a presentation that we prepared to kind of walk you through. You can feel free to ask questions as we go, but I might answer the question later. So if you want to wait until the end, if there are any questions, that would be fine as well. So give me one
Yes.
second. We test ran this, so let me make sure I can share
Great.
my appropriate screen.
Yes, we'll wait for questions until the end for everybody.
Okay. And you see my screen now that says overview of HPD enforcement?
Yes,
Okay,
we can see your
wonderful.
screen.
Wonderful. As was said, I am the Deputy Commissioner for the Office of Enforcement and Neighborhood Services. I have been with HPD for more than 25 years, always in a role in the enforcement area. So I have seen us grow and come a long way. But some of our basics have remained very constant over that time. So I'm going to focus mostly on things from a tenant perspective, but if you have questions from an owner perspective, certainly we can answer those along the way as well. So HPD's code enforcement is primarily complaint driven. Complaints can be filed with HPD through 311 if you call, through 311 mobile, or the portal. Tenants can also file requests for inspection through the housing court, which when they file a tenant action, they can fill out a form to indicate what they need inspected, and we will proceed that way. When complaints come in through 311, and complaints that come to HPD are housing maintenance complaints. So it's things like heat and hot water, roaches, leaks, mold, lead, complaints about things like structural issues in a building or elevators go to the Department of Buildings. There are some complaints, rat complaints, go to the Department of Health. So just to kind of parse things out, when a tenant calls, we prefer that the tenant give us their contact information. And for almost all complaint types, it's required, except for heat and hot water. So when we get that call, our first automated call is to the property owner to let them know that we have received a complaint and that we expect that they will move forward with addressing that complaint. We have ownership information from the property registration that property owners are required to file annually with the agency. We then attempt to call the tenant back and say, has the landlord addressed your issue? On those occasions when the tenant says yes, the complaint is closed. If the tenant doesn't respond to our call or the tenant says no, the complaint goes into the queue for inspection. An inspector comes with a uniform to the location. If they find that the condition warrants a violation is issued. The notice of violation is sent to the registered property owner. Again, as I mentioned, landlords are required to file a registration with us annually. The owner then is given a period of time, depending on the seriousness of the condition, to correct that condition and to notify us that the condition has been corrected. If the condition is immediately hazardous, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, the tenant, HPD will follow up with the tenant. So conditions like lead-based paint is a great example, window guards, mold over a certain size, as indicated in the law, HPD will proactively reach out to the tenant if the owner hasn't advised us that the work was done. What that means, I'll talk about again a little bit later in terms of emergency repair. So when we do our inspections, when an inspector comes, no matter what the complainant is reporting, the inspector is proactively looking for 10 conditions really around health and safety, right? So fire safety is primary, health conditions. We're looking for smoke detectors, we're looking for carbon monoxide detectors, fire safety notices, which are required to be posted on the back of a door, double cylinder locks, which are locks where you need a key from the inside to get out, illegal bars or gates on on egress windows, mold, mice and roaches, self-closing doors, window guards, and lead-based paint. These are the conditions that every inspector will look for whenever they are inside an apartment, again, regardless of what the tenant was complaining about. Our emergency repair program will look for Class C violations, but only certain Class Cs. So on this list, you'll see that I've indicated which are always emergency repairs, which means that we are always going to follow up with the tenant. Self-closing doors on window guards and lead-based paint, and mold, if it is over 100 square feet in a room, as indicated in the law, we will also follow up with our emergency repair program. Heat and hot water, I know now it's 80 degrees every day, so this is less of a concern for folks, but the requirements are clear in the law about when violations can be issued for a lack of heat or hot water. When this is a very different violation type for us, as I said, generally we mail out notices of violation to an owner. We aren't required to do personal service. But for heat and hot water violations, we do write the violation at the building at the time of the inspection, and we post that notice of violation. You'll see this little white sheet right here is the notice of violation for a heat and hot water violation. Multiple violations for heat and hot water do result in additional fees to a property owner. Generally speaking, HPD violations do not have associated penalties with the issuance of the violation. The penalty is a civil penalty that HPD or the tenant can seek in housing court. Violations overall. So again, for those of you familiar with DOB, we're kind of the opposite of that process. A Class A violation for us is the least serious violation. A Class B violation is hazardous, and a Class C violation is an immediately hazardous violation. Here on this screen, I have just a screenshot from our website. This is called HPD Online. You can go to our website. Find Building Data is the title of the header, and you can look up any building that HPD has jurisdiction over, whether they have violations or not, whether they have complaints or not. You can see there the registration information for the property, and then you can drill down to look for complaints that have been filed in the past 2 years. You can see all of the open violations. You can see any litigation that HPD is involved in. There's quite a bit of information there. I encourage you to check it out. And we advise tenants after an inspection is completed to also go to HPD Online to see the latest about their building. And I'm happy to show that live if people would like to see that. The emergency repair process, which I've now referenced a couple of times, again, handles Class C violations that aren't timely certified. And what we do through that program, so this is, again, the complaint has come in, the inspection has been completed, the violation has been issued, the owner has exhausted the period of time that they had to do the repair, and that varies depending on the violation. And now HPD is going to get involved again. So we will attempt to contact the owner or the managing agent by phone, by email to encourage compliance. We send out a technical staff person to assess what needs to be done to do the repair. We hire the contractor goes, we sign off on that repair, and then we build the property. That bill goes to the property in the form of a line item on their property tax. That will accrue interest if it's not timely paid. And when we used to have tax lien sale, could get a property into the tax lien sale. There are exceptions for Class C violations that go through this process, so I just wanted to highlight some, and I mentioned them before. Right, pests is one. That is a building-wide condition that requires a lot more work than an emergency repair. It really requires constant supervision, gas restoration, and double cylinder locks. So just to talk a little bit now from the owner's perspective, there are two important dates when they get that notice of violation from us in the mail. They have a correction date and they have a certification date. And so those, they're right at the front of the notice of violation they receive. They should always be paying attention to that. Should they certify to us that a condition was corrected, the tenant will be notified. So they'll receive a letter in the mail from us saying your landlord said they fixed the broken plaster. If it's not fixed, please contact HPD and we'll come out and we'll look at that condition. And potentially that could result in what's known as a false certification and also lead to penalties. HPD is obligated, though, after 70 days after that certification for most violations, lead violations are not included in this, to be dismissed based on the owner's certification after 70 days if the tenant doesn't object and we do not audit the certification, which we do audit, especially Class C certifications. So I'm going to switch kind of from, that's our general process, our usual process for anyone who calls in a complaint. We do have several proactive programs looking at buildings across the city based on different criteria. So I wanted to highlight a few of those for you. The heat sensor program. So going forward, starting in the past, we selected buildings every 2 years. Going forward, it's going to be a selection every year of 50 buildings that have a lot of heat violations basically in the previous period. And we go, and those buildings are required to install heat sensors. They're required to do a lot of reporting to HPD. HPD is required to do proactive inspections in those buildings throughout the heat season. We have a self-closing doors proactive inspection program, which this is the first year. This is the first round that's ending. And we select 300 buildings based on criteria we've come up with in coordination with the buildings department and the fire department. We go to those buildings, we do what we call roof to cellar inspections. So start at the top, come down, inspect the whole building, trying to access doors to ensure that those doors are self-closing as required by law. And we do lead proactive inspections. We do it based on two different criteria. The criteria I've highlighted here is we look at buildings that have received lead violations from HPD or water leak mold violations from HPD, and we select those buildings to go and again knock on every door, try to identify where there might be children under 6 in the building, and conduct inspections of those apartments. As you may or may not know, lead-based paint is really focused on apartments with children, lead-based paint hazards, that is. Other enhanced enforcement programs that, again, I'll touch on lightly, I've included here, and I assume we will share this presentation with you, links to our web pages for each of these programs if you are interested in finding out more, but you can also just go to HPD's website and you can find any of these. The heat sensor program I talked about, emergency repair program I discussed. The alternative enforcement program is a program where we pick 250 buildings every year. That's based on ratio of violations per dwelling unit, some of what the emergency repair charges are. There's a strict formula for the selection of those buildings. There is a 4-month period for those buildings to correct certain percentages of violations to be discharged from the program. If the buildings are not discharged within those 4 months, there are fees that are associated that could be up to $1,000 per dwelling unit, and HPD can issue an order to do system replacement work in the building. So it really is a program targeted to buildings that have systemic issues. The 7A program is a program where HPD or tenants can go to court and petition the housing court to appoint an administrator. These are really for the worst of the worst buildings where the owner has been non-responsive to other attempts from HPD to get compliance. And this program can offer financial assistance to the administrator to, again, address systemic problems in the building. The Underlying Conditions Program is a program that targets buildings with mold and leak violations specifically. So the purpose of this program, or how the program works, is an engineer or design professional is required to go and assess the building to identify the source of the water and to ensure that the owner takes appropriate steps to address that if there are systemic issues. Mold and leak violations must be removed for discharge from that program. HPD has an anti-harassment unit. This unit targets buildings that we've identified through various criteria or that has been brought to our attention by elected officials or community boards or whomever where tenants are being harassed, or they claim they're being harassed at least. And HPD can go out, do a full building inspection, really talk to the tenants about what is happening in the building, and determine whether or not some kind of other enhanced enforcement, including housing litigation, might be required for those buildings. Violations are generally issued. Certificate of No Harassment program is more of a reactive program. So buildings in this program can be in this program for 3 different reasons. One is the building is an SRO. One is the building is in a special district, and there are several special districts throughout the city. And one is that it has been selected for our pilot program, which has, again, a strict criteria for identifying buildings. For those buildings that would require a certificate of no harassment, it's only triggered if the property owner files with the Department of Buildings for certain types of permits. And generally, those permits are around changing use or occupancy of the building. The idea is to prevent property owners from harassing tenants out in order to totally, redesign their building and make more money by getting rent stabilized tenants out is really the purpose there. And our housing litigation division in general, in which CONH is housed, really is a first line of defense enforcement. They bring comprehensive cases against buildings which have significant numbers of violations. They would be the ones to initiate the 7A litigation. They bring heat and hot water cases throughout the heat season. We bring hundreds of those cases, seeking orders to correct for property owners. And we do a couple of other different types of litigation in housing court, and there's a housing court in every borough. I just wanted to, as I conclude, point out some resources for you, again, to get some more information about us and the work we do. So our website has tons of pages about each of those programs, as I mentioned, plus tons of others about information related to the types of inspections we do and types of violations we write. Our ABCs of Housing is a booklet that we put together every year. It's available to tenants, owners, whomever. Online. You can get it from our website. You can call 311 to request copies of it. It's about 40 pages long now, and it has tons of resources, more information than I could possibly cover for you here today on tenant harassment, on rent regulation, on resources to find affordable housing, on resources to find preservation loans. So again, I point you to that. Our HPD Online, which I already talked about, and our New York City Housing Connect for tenants looking for affordable housing. All of those you can find on our website. With that, I will wrap it up so not take up your whole meeting. But again, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Anne Marie. Thank you very much. That was a great presentation to give us a overview as to the to the assignments within your office. So at this point, I'll just announce up front we will take questions for Santiago, and the order of questions we're going to do slightly different. Now, first, we're going to take any questions from committee members, so specifically for committee members. Then we'll move it out to board members, and then any additional questions for us after that. So I will begin there. Let me just take a look. We do have a few hands up. No one yet from the committee. So I will.
I have a question if I'm there, very speaking committee member.
Oh, sure. Yes, please.
How are you? I'd like to know why a window gate on a fire escape window should be the fault of the landlord when the tenant puts it up. Now, I agree it's a very dangerous thing, don't get me wrong. But why should the landlord be penalized when the tenant does it? And the same question, the same type of question, if a tenant takes out batteries from the smoke alarm because it beeps when they cook, why should the landlord be penalized every time?
Right, and I hear that, and I've heard that from owners often over the years. So HPD does not issue tenant-caused violations. We don't issue violations to tenants, rather. And so the law presumes that if the condition exists because the owner is responsible for the property. I understand what you're saying. I would keep your records for your own purposes if ever there is enforcement of the violation, or if the tenant challenges that violation is there and they want you to correct it. But the inspector is not able to, adjudicate the cause of why the smoke detector is not there or doesn't have the battery, or why the window guard is either there or the window gate is in the fire escape window. So as an owner, I appreciate your question, and I understand it. But the inspector who is there is documenting what they've observed.
I understand that. So why can't the inspector say, "Oh, madam, you have a illegal window gate. Maybe you should make sure to get it removed," or something to that effect?
Right, and again, the inspector is only there to observe the condition. So
Well,
should the violation get adjudicated in court, and someone is seeking civil penalties, or someone is seeking the correction of the condition, that is when you as an owner have your documentation to show, I put in that carbon monoxide detector on this date, and this is what my record shows, and the tenant took it down.
I'm going to tell you a quick scenario, if you don't mind. I just had the scenario last week. I had a violation. I heard a new new carbon monoxide detector in. 3 days later, tenant called the inspector again. Same violation. I asked tenant what happened. They said, "Well, it's not a keeping. I take it down." So I said, "Why are you doing that? It's not safe."
The district office can jump in and assist any specific issues that require more than just a quick Q&A. Efraim, I'll follow up with you tomorrow.
Okay, fine.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Okay, so we'll move on to just a few questions we do have here. We'll move on to board members. Elizabeth Denise.
Hi, thank you so much for this presentation. I know that one of the things HPD does is run Housing Connect, and just a question that I have, because I know that I've heard from so many people that they've been struggling to get an affordable apartment, especially one of those permanently affordable apartments from Housing Connect. Do you have a sense of how many applications are coming in for each affordable home, and especially in our district? I know it's a big shortage, and I know it's not the only place that people can find homes in that price range, but just wanted to get a better understanding of where we are in the housing affordability crisis, particularly in light of some of the proposals coming later in this meeting.
So thank you for the question. I am not the expert on the affordable housing side of HPD's world, so I will take your question back and get an answer for that. Affordable housing lottery and the development of that is in different office within HPD. So unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you, but we'll see if we can circle back with our intergovernmental and get an answer for the board.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, we'll move on to Board Chair Carl Henry Cesar.
Folks, good evening. Deputy Commissioner Santiago, thank you for the presentation as well. So my question will be brief. The city budget is under negotiation, and so in the worst case scenario that the cuts that have been proposed for months are implemented, my question for you is, are any of the various enforcement programs that you presented on, would those be in danger of not taking place anymore because there aren't enough people? Or would it be that, capacity would have to be reduced by, at least 30% across the board? That's my question. That's an arbitrary percentage, but that's my question.
Right. As of right now, all of our enforcement programs are funded. And they have been throughout. We've continued to hire housing inspectors, and actually have the highest number of housing inspectors that we've had in a long time right now. So I can never say never, but it is not in the plan as far as I know.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
You're welcome.
you. And thank you, Carl. Okay, I see one more hand up, and this might be our last question for this evening. But what I'll say, Emery, thank you so much for this, initial presentation. Certainly, housing enforcement is quite a big issue within our district, and it might be very helpful for us to have you back to maybe talk about some more specifics, some more district-specific questions that we can have for you as well. So with that being said, I will ask for, let's see, Mehdi Harris, you have your hand up, and please ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. And I appreciate the presentation. Thank you for this, for everything you do. I have a question about the temperature sensors you mentioned, and the questions that came to my mind is, you may know the details or may not, I don't know, but what is the threshold for the maximum temperature, and how long it should be in that range to be considered as a violation? Because, for example, let's say it's 80 Fahrenheit, and if it is 1 hour in 80 Fahrenheit, is that violation, or should be longer time? Is it daytime, nighttime? Because those also have different thresholds. If you have any, and also another question with that is, how do you collect that data? You made a mention, and I missed that. Sorry.
So there is no maximum temperature right now in the law. The minimum temperature, the temperature that has to be provided, is if it's under 55 degrees outside during the day between October and May, it has to be 68 degrees at least within the apartment. That's during the day, and then at night it has to be 62 degrees no matter what the outdoor temperature is. Yeah, the law doesn't set a maximum temperature. In terms of the collection of the data, you're talking about when our inspectors do an inspection, how we collect the data, or you're referring to the heat sensor specifically? I'm sorry, you're muted.
Thank you. They probably log the data, and I was thinking whether inspection just downloads the data on some sort of device, or how do they do that?
Inspectors are assigned a new thermometer every heat season, and they do it the old-fashioned way. They have a thermometer, and they go into the apartment, and they go into the room that the tenant indicates is the coldest room besides the bathroom. They hold the temperature kind of midway. They stand there for a couple of minutes, and that's how they take the air temperature. Then they go and they take the water temperature.
Thank you, but yeah, so that probably is another idea, that they can use some data loggers that logs the data.
Again, for any follow-up, you
yeah.
can use the community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Before we go, I'm sorry, I hate to put in, and I'm sorry that I was late, but I would love to just say hello. As I'm here, I'm Assistant Commissioner for Government Affairs, Nicole Simmons, and I wanted to, hi there, I just wanted to say hello to everyone and thank you for having us. And I know that you all, some of you have already said that you work with folks on my team, which is great. I'm glad to hear that. Arvind Sindwani. There are also a couple of other folks we want to make sure you have contact with. We're a little bit low on staff, we're staffing up, but we are still here for you as well, as am I. And so you can reach out to me. I'll put my, I'll make sure that the folks who coordinated this have my email, as well as others on the team. And questions about things like Housing Connect, we can work with you to have someone talk to you about that stuff too. There are folks that can come out and do a short presentation. And there are also folks that come out and help people sign up for Housing Connect. So our ambassadors. So we can talk about that going forward. But all the questions you have about things that are beyond Anne-Marie's area and things about Anne-Marie's area going forward, please funnel through us and we'll make sure to work with you to get you the information we need. Sorry to butt in, but I just wanted to make sure that I got a chance to say that.
Not at all. Thank you very much, Nicole, for saying hello. And Glenn, I do see your question there, but I think if you could put it in the chat, maybe we'll take that afterwards. We're just a little tight for time this evening. We'd like to move on to our next matter, but I do thank Anne-Marie and Nicole for joining us this evening. I think this is the beginning of a continuing conversation that we would like to have with this committee. So we appreciate your time and look forward to continuing that conversation in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Okay, have a good evening. All right, at this point, I will turn over the festivities to my co-chair, Joanne Brown. So I turn it over to you for our next agenda item.
Good evening, everyone. Let's see if I remember how to do this. I'm just kidding. It hasn't been that long. All right, so our next agenda item is the City of Yes for housing opportunities. I believe we have members of DCP here joining us tonight. Want to welcome them to this meeting and thank them for being with us here tonight. A couple of housekeeping items. So I want to remind everyone that this is not a public hearing. Members of the public that are here should be here to listen to the presentation and form questions. If you have opinions on the changes that are made into this zoning text amendment, we encourage you to come back to the public hearing. But what we'd like to hear tonight from everyone is clarifying questions. If there's something that you didn't understand about what's being presented, that public hearing will be at some point in early June before our general meeting. So consider the first week or so. So we're looking for clarifying questions during Q&A. Who will be doing the presentation? I see Hanif Yazdi, you've shared your content. Are you doing the presentation this evening? If you...
Hanif, you might be muted.
Yeah. I got it. I was trying to unmute.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you're doing the presentation this evening?
I am. I was just checking to see if everything looks good. Is the presentation visible on your end?
Yes.
Are we seeing the slide transitions?
Yes. So what I'm thinking is that I know that you have several topics, for example, town center zoning, transit-oriented development, et cetera, et cetera. I was thinking so that we can be expeditious and focused. As we conclude each topic, we'll open up for questions because there's quite a few topics. We'll take questions for about 5 to 7 minutes. Again, opening them up to committee members first, and then some members of the public and board members. Does that work for you, Hanif?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, great. So I believe we are ready when you are ready. Thank you.
Yes, and one moment. I think it's set so that when I gesture, there are reactions. Please don't be... okay, yeah, that's kind of distracting, so I'll toggle that off, I think. Okay, great. And we'll get started for this evening. So thank you, everybody, for joining or rejoining, if this is your second opportunity to hear the City of Yes for Housing opportunity presentation. I'm joined this evening by David Weisglass from our Brooklyn office team, who's a specialist and can answer some additional questions around things that I'm not able to cover this evening. So we're excited to have you hear about the proposal again. And with that, I'm going to jump right into it. You're going to hear me say something a lot this evening, and that is a little bit of housing in every neighborhood. That is going to be the name of the game for all of these proposals, and you'll see kind of the citywide impact related to that minor adjustment to every neighborhood, resulting kind of in a little bit more housing that doesn't overburden any one neighborhood. So very briefly, for folks who weren't here the first time, there is a housing crisis. There's a housing shortage in the city. That's what was the genesis of the thinking behind this opportunity proposal. Brooklyn vacancy rate is around 1.27%. Citywide rates are around 1.4%. This is the lowest since 1968. So we know the impact that low housing supply has on New Yorkers. Over half of New York City renters are rent burdened. That means they spend 30% of their monthly income on rent. So it's a direct cause of housing insecurity in our city, direct cause of homelessness. About every night in 2023, 92,000 homeless New Yorkers slept in shelters. This included over 33,000 children. That's an unconscionable number of people, and it's a direct result of housing shortage, among other things. Most of New York City's housing was created in the first half of the 20th century. Since that time, housing production has fallen dramatically. It's in part because of zoning that has become increasingly restrictive since 1961. Housing production has decreased, but the demand has not. The demand has only increased since that time. There's a number of reasons for this. Households are smaller today than they used to be. Even the same amount of people take up more space. More people are coming into the city. Many different reasons. Population has not gone down. Housing production has gone down. That's the key takeaway. Housing production is the housing production that has occurred has been limited to a few neighborhoods. In 2023, 10 districts produced as much housing as the other 49 combined. And you can see the most active districts on the map here. Some neighborhoods stop producing housing. That puts pressure on other neighborhoods to produce even more. So what we do in one part of the city affects life all over the city. The proposals in City of Yes for Housing Opportunity emerged from the goals outlined in Where We Live NYC. You may have heard about that plan. It was created by HPD in collaboration with over 240 organizations. In a tight housing market, landlords can charge high rents, and existing tenants are vulnerable to tenant harassment, poor housing quality, displacement pressure, and so on. When there are few apartments to choose from, renters pay more. So we understand. I think I've made the point here. So we'll move on. You can just kind of see the impact of that housing insecurity and that the consequences of that here. Okay. And again, because many of you have heard this before, I can go through much of this, but I just want to clarify one thing before we get into some of the zoning content slides. Many agencies work on policies and programs that aim to address New York City housing needs. We are responsible for a lot of the zoning. And the zoning regulates what can be built on a particular site, how big the building can be, what uses it can have, residential or commercial, for example. Sometimes zoning includes other things like requirements for income restricted housing. Zoning does not fund new housing or directly control what will be built. It only establishes rules for what may be built. How much housing gets built depends on many different things, many different factors. Other tools the city uses to support good housing outcomes include subsidies, tax incentives, programs for affordable ownership, tenant protections that guarantee New Yorkers' rights, and so on. Okay. So, changing our zoning can respond to these issues by increasing the number of types of homes available in every neighborhood across the city. If each neighborhood adds a little more housing, New York can add a lot more overall without any single neighborhood, and this is critical, experiencing dramatic changes or overtaxed infrastructure. So let's kind of take a look at the proposal as organized. We've got low density proposals, medium high density proposals, parking, and others. The amendment is the biggest pro-housing change DCP has undertaken. There's the universal affordability preference, which you'll learn about. The proposal would remove residential parking mandates. It would create missing middle housing. It would help owners in low density neighborhoods, allowing them to create accessory dwelling units, provide small buildings with flexibility, adapt over time, and many other proposals. And you can see kind of the blue areas are the low density areas where the low density proposals would be applicable. The orange parts are the medium density areas where the medium density proposals would be applicable. And you can see kind of how that plays out in CB14, the low and medium density areas. So with that, let's talk about the actual low density proposals that we want to implement. Exclusionary zoning rules have made it virtually impossible to build housing in many low density neighborhoods across the city. This places additional pressure on the high density parts of the city to produce more housing. This wasn't always the case. Small apartment buildings and 2 to 3 family homes were common in New York City low density neighborhoods and were allowed in many places until as recently as the 1990s and early 2000s when stricter zoning prevented them. City of Yes for Housing would reintroduce modest buildings that are more naturally affordable than other types of construction and apartment buildings at a scale in which they can take advantage of existing affordability programs. Together, these changes allow for the creation of more housing in low density areas without affecting neighborhood character. So these are kind of the low density proposals, and you can see sort of the 1 family and 2 family districts across CB14. So the first low density proposal here is the town center proposal. And what we can do is go through the proposal really quickly. So here I'll kind of get to our actually more detailed description of the proposals. One moment. Okay, one second. No, yeah, actually, yeah, we'll do that. You wanted us to stop after every one, right? So we could take some questions. So we'll go ahead and do that. So I'll talk about the town center proposal, and then we will take some questions. So the town center proposal aims to create more missing middle housing in low density areas. It's one of our low density proposals. Missing middle refers to a category of housing that's modest in scale and often affordable to middle income residents. A once common type of housing that's not often built in the city anymore. This proposal, the town center zoning proposal, aims to re-legalize mixed-use apartments or buildings with a ground floor commercial use and a few stories of housing on top. This is a classic New York City building type that exists along many low-density commercial corridors. Overly complex rules make it almost impossible to build new ones. This proposal streamlines zoning rules, including restrictive limits on floor area and height, so that it is once again feasible to build 2 to 4 stories of housing above a commercial floor. So we can stop for questions around town center.
Yep, absolutely. Are there any questions about town center zoning from committee members? Okay, I do see a member of the public that has, or you could be a board member, a new board member. I apologize if you are, because I don't know their names. The first question will be from Carissa Alfonso. And remember, we're looking for clarifying questions.
Yes, hi. I am actually a new board member. Nice to meet you all. I'm not too sure if this is a clarifying question, but I just wanted to know, just based off of what I'm seeing here, if housing will be built on top of these commercial buildings, will these businesses seek a form of compensation for the amount of time that they'll be closed for the construction?
The housing will be allowed. So whoever owns that lot, whoever owns that property, will have, before they did not have the right to build multiple stories above. Now they would have the right to do that. So there's no program in place to compensate the business owner for what the owner of the lot does. I'll defer to David for any additional context that I may have missed in that answer.
Yeah, no, you roughly covered it. Hi, David Weissglass, team leader in the Brooklyn office. Good to see everybody. Yeah, the short answer is that's outside the scope of the zoning resolution. If the owner of the property does want to take advantage of this, which of course no owner has to take advantage of any of these programs at all, these are just options and increased flexibility, then it would be up to the owner to kind of regulate that through a lease agreement and through coordination with whoever's already tenanted on the property.
Thank you. Next question from Greg Alvarez, and then I have a question.
Okay, thank you. So looking at the map, obviously there aren't that many districts within our district that would necessarily be affected by this, but we do have other commercial corridors within the district. So is there? I'm just trying to understand, like say for Portellu and Avenue, with those other commercial corridors, there are going to be different requirements for those, correct? This is just really for these specific areas within the district. Thank you.
That's correct. The town center zoning proposal only refers to overlays in low density districts.
Yeah, some of those other locations you're talking about are more than likely high density areas, R6 through R10 zoning with an overlay, and this is not applicable in those areas.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then my question was answered. Thank you. We can move on to the next topic.
All right. So our next proposal, and I'm also seeing, should I stop for questions in the chat, or maybe Joanne, if you could maybe read those out for us, or in the interest of time, I'm not sure how you want to do it.
I can also do my best. I'm taking notes on the side, but I can do my best to address questions in the chat while you're presenting me.
Okay. So yes.
So we're going to keep a record of the chat, just in case there's some details that we want to look at later before the public hearing. I'll read this question out of the chat, but I can't read questions out of the chat. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and so that we can keep this in an orderly way. Is there more differentiated data on apartment vacancy rate? I'm interested in how rates look by rent below 1,000. I'd like us to move on because I'm not entirely sure that this question is applicable to town center zoning.
Got it. Maybe we can answer them as a batch kind of later on. All right, great. So let's move to transit-oriented development. The second proposal that's among the low-density area proposals. It's for missing middle housing in transit-oriented development areas. The transit-oriented development would allow for low-rise buildings, that's 3 to 5 stories, depending on the underlying zoning, on sites that are near transit and meet very specific criteria. And so what are those criteria? The site must be on a block that's within half a mile of a subway or rail station. The lot must be over 5,000 square feet. The lot must be located on the short end of the block or along a wide street, which zoning defines as being over 75 feet wide. Community facilities like faith-based organizations or libraries can also use these rules throughout the city on sites over 5,000 square feet where a community facility space is present. Our transit-oriented development rules would promote missing middle housing while also promoting sustainability by adding housing in areas with good transit access. So I can stop there for any questions folks have about this proposal.
I'll start with a question. I think I read somewhere in the resolution, what I'm trying to understand is contiguous, right? So did I read somewhere in the resolution that it's 230 feet from the intersection? So you meet near transit, 5,000 square feet on the short end of a block or facing a street over 75 wide. But does that mean that anywhere on the block can be a building that is 3 to 5 stories, or is it only within 230 feet from the intersection?
It's my understanding, David, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's not about proximity to the intersection, it's proximity to the street. So if there's a wide street adjacent to your property, then the TOD rules it would satisfy that condition of the TOD rule. So if there's a 75-foot street next to you, am I getting at what you're asking?
I think I can jump in here. Yeah, Hanif, I generally went at it, and we might have missed something, Joanne, if there's a 230-foot dimension that you read in the text, perhaps.
Yeah, that's what I read, and my understanding is more about putting the larger buildings as, you know, towards the ends of the blocks as opposed to in the middle of the blocks to continue the feeling throughout the block, but still creating housing as end caps, which is where I think the 230 feet tries to delineate where it's going. So feel free to circle back on that if you want to answer that question. But I think it's trying to understand what this is going to look like for, I think, a lot of the people that are here that are in low density neighborhoods, and what, you know, is there going to be a building in the middle of the block? Is it contiguous from the corners? So that's just something that I'm throwing out there.
Yeah, appreciate that. I think we'll circle back on the 230-foot rule. I'm not sure about that, but I see a lot of questions in the chat that are asking about clarifications, about combinations. So I think just going over very quickly kind of what's going on here. It's a couple of the and statements, and then there's an or statement within, which I know can be confusing, right? So first of all, it needs to be within a half-mile transit. What you'll see here in front of you, these purple sites are the sites in which this will be applicable. However, oh, thanks, Anita, that's great. However, what we see here is, you know, oh my God, every purple site could be 3 to 5 stories, but that's not true. Really, the only things that the purple sites show are low density districts that are within a half mile of a transit station. What this map does not take into account, just because we have geographic limitations, basically, or I don't know, GIS limitations in putting our maps together, is that we did not take into account which of these sites are over 5,000 square feet and which ones are on the short end of the block or facing a street over 75 feet wide. It's one or the other, right? So when you actually look at the district, and I know we had questions about what it means to be the short end of a block. Basically, if you look at a lot of blocks in New York City, including in CB14, they basically, you know, when they're bound by 4 streets, they generally look like a rectangle rather than a perfect square. And in the situations in which they're a rectangle, the short ends of the block are the sides of the rectangle that are smaller, right? So, I mean, you could look at a map, I could bring up a map, and that could work as well. So they need to be there. The site would need to be 5,000 square feet. My understanding is that 5,000 square foot would need to be a zoning lot, which means if you own 2 tax lots that are adjacent to each other, and you want to combine them into one zoning lot, and the zoning lot is what is used for calculating, you know, for applying the zoning resolution. If it's 5,000 square feet, when you combine them, my understanding is that is totally legit. That would be legal. But it would also need to be obviously near transit, which much of your district is, on the short end of the block, or on a street that's 75 feet wide. But we can get more clarification on some of the nitty-gritty details on that and get back to you.
Okay. I think we answered the two questions in the chat. Let me see whose hand is raised. And so we have Joe Enright. Please feel free to ask your question. Joe Enright, if you are speaking, you're still muted. Okay. We'll circle back to you. All right, Greg, did you have any additional questions on transit-oriented development? I actually just had one question. How many units do you think can be put on a 5,000 square foot lot? What is the FAR, depending on which residential zoning? So it's all proposed 1 or 1.5. How many units do you think can go into into these small buildings? And the reason why I asked this question is I just want to bring up the point that we just had good cause eviction passed, and buildings are only eligible for good cause eviction based on how many units are in them. I believe it's 9 or greater. So what I just want to make sure that we're sort of, you know, that zoning is thinking about what law it says, and if we're building too many small buildings, those units won't be get the benefits of legislation that's recently been passed. So, you know, just some idea of how many units you think would be in an FAR of 1 on 5,000 square feet.
It's a great question that I can kind of circle up, you know, do some research and send some information on. Although I will add that the unit count good cause eviction is attributable to the owner. So if they own more than a certain number of units at all across the city, then they would be. So even if they own 10 different units all across the city, they would still be qualified for that.
Right, I'm aware of that, but I don't know if they've really elucidated how buildings are built under an LLC and whether or not a portfolio is going to include 10 LLCs with 9 units each. So that part of it is a little murky.
Okay.
But yeah, thank you. We'll take one more question from Steve Cohen.
I can.
And Joe
okay.
Enright, I think, has his hand back up because he figured out how to unmute himself.
Okay. Steve and then Joe. Steve Cohen, you're still muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. Sorry about that. I was just a little confused by the map, in the sense that it looks like Brooklyn College is grayed out, but I couldn't tell like what neighboring potentially residential area. I mean, I assume we're not talking about building residential on Brooklyn College, so I'm wondering if it's capturing any like adjacent housing like right off of campus.
The proposal, this specific proposal, only applies to low density districts within that 0.5 mile of a subway station. So if it's a medium or high density district, if it's a commercial district. If it's anything other than a low density district, it does not. Either the amount that you can build is over 5 stories anyway, in which case it would count, or it just doesn't match those criteria.
Yeah, and to add on to that, it's a low density residential
Right.
district. I think that's the key word. So Brooklyn College, for instance, let me see if I just
I think
messed
it's
up the
a.
map.
I think Brooklyn College area
Yeah,
is like a
and
C4, something like that.
okay, so Brooklyn College is an R6 district, which is not how we define low density. Low density districts are R1 through R5 districts. R6 districts, this is a different proposal and is not applicable here.
I just want to add it's really also based on the type of street that you live on. So, you know, for example, and this is not all inclusive, but Ocean Avenue, Dorchester, Ditmas, East 17th Street, Glenwood, Bedford Avenue, Avenue I, Avenue H are all over 75 feet according to the map that I looked at. And they all have, except for Avenue I, they're all R1, R3X, or a few R4As thrown in there. So it's just based on the width of the street and then the lot size. For context in Community District 14. Last question will be from Joe Enright, and then we'll move on. You're still muted, Joe Enright. I'm sorry you're having technical difficulties. Feel free to put it in the chat. All right, let's move on to the next set.
Okay. Let's on to ADUs. Okay. In the rest of the low density areas, the proposal aims to give homeowners more flexibility. Under this proposal, a 1 or 2 family home would be allowed to add a small ADU or accessory dwelling unit. There are a range of ADU types, including backyard colleges, garage conversions, basement apartments, and so on. The small units would provide important housing options for small households, a young person moving into their own place, elderly resident who wants to age in place, and members of growing families and so on. Because of their small size, they also serve different income levels than a large single-family home. Successful ADU programs have been implemented in other places, Austin, Seattle, state of Connecticut, and so on. They show us that these units can give multi-generational families a little more space and help middle-class homeowners with household expenses. The proposal includes rules to ensure that ADUs are safe. New basement ADUs would not be allowed in the coastal floodplain, and no ADUs would be allowed in the special coastal risk districts. We don't have any of those in CB14, not those special coastal risk districts at least, areas of our city with the most severe flood risk. Outside of these coastal areas, basement ADUs may be subject to additional regulations or review. With that, I'll stop for questions about ADUs. Must the home be owner occupied? I believe not. No.
Yes. All right, we'll start with Gregory Alvarez. And I believe there's.
Yeah, thank you. So just generally, can you talk a little bit about the design options for ADUs in terms of where they may be located, whether or not they have to be in an attached building, whether or not we're talking about basement apartments, whether or not we're talking about any other sort of design in that regard. And then secondly, in terms of process, you mentioned that there might be other regulations. So is it that they'll be as of right? Is it that they'll be subject to community board review? If you could just tell us a little bit about that as well. Thank you.
Yes, I can try to answer the last part first. They will be as of right in the historic district, and I know there's 5 of them in CB14. They will be subject to LPC kind of approval, but in areas where you do have those applicable zoning districts, they will be as of right. In terms of the design options, I have at the end of our presentation a few a few kind of illustrative, kind of visuals here that can give you a sense of kind of what some of these would look like. You can have the detached, they can be attached, they can be a basement kind of within the rules, and then there's the attic unit as well.
Okay, and I'm sorry, and the intention is to legalize existing as well, right? That's part of this as well.
In terms of legalizing existing, for example, basement apartments, those are related to kind of a state rule, David, if I'm not mistaken. But yes, if there is an existing unit, it would be legalized. But the intention is to not just legalize the existing ones, but to allow for the development of additional units.
Yeah, thanks, Hanif. If I can, I just to reiterate kind of what Hanif said there, they can come in many different forms. You know, I think a lot of times we focus on those backyard cottages, and many of them manifest themselves that way in other places, but they need not, right? I used to work in other jurisdictions that had a pretty robust ADU program. We saw a lot of attic and basement conversions that didn't actually expand the home at all. It was just excess space on a property. As for legalization, that's something that we only have the jurisdiction to kind of do so much. And so that's one of those things that requires a lot of, coordination with state laws and other laws that are outside of the zoning resolution. But we do want to create a pathway to legalization, because the alternative is allowing illegal, unsafe apartments to continue to exist. And if we just shut them down, that's another option, and may have to be done in certain cases where they're completely unsafe and there's just no way around it. But there are certain situations in which an apartment could be made safe with a few, updates. That way we wouldn't have to evict a tenant that's already there. And we can make sure that that apartment is kind of on the books, and that we know that it, meets all the guidelines that we have, going through our standard process. I mean, this is kind of like one of the reasons that we're trying to do this is we've heard from CB14 and from a number of districts that there's just so many illegal conversions already. People are basically already doing this. And when people pick up hammers and nails and do it without a permit, we have no way to actually make sure that they're safe and habitable, right? And so that's part of the reason of having these. And also why we do want to work towards legalization. But there are kind of laws outside of the control of the ZR that kind of prevent us from having this full legalization program as it exists right now. So we can, that's something that we need to work on even after this amendment goes through, if it does go through.
All right, let me read a question from the chat. We have about 3 more minutes for questions for this topic, and then moving on. The question, must the home be owner occupied to build an ADU?
No, it's
Okay.
my understanding, yeah.
Can a 2-family add an ADU for a total of 3 units in a 1-family district such as R1 or R2? And then someone also wants to know R3X. So an ADU, part of a 2-family house.
I'm going to punt that one to David.
ADUs are going to be permitted in any single or 2-family home, and this is citywide, right? So even if you're in a high density district, I know we're saying this is low density, but even if you are in a high density district, and we don't actually see a ton of these, but let's say there's an R7A in which there's a single family home, that single family homeowner would be permitted to add an ADU. Same with a 2-family home, that's kind of regardless of district, you'd be able to add an ADU. But it is limited to 1 and 2-family homes. If you have an existing 3-unit plus building, can't build an ADU.
All right. And then somebody wants you to discuss relaxing the side yard allowances again. So allowing the narrow side yards in this resolution, this particular item. The side yards are going to change, right, to 5 feet.
Yeah, but so there's a couple of different things here that I want to make sure we don't easy for me to say, conflate. So the ADU proposal requires that a detached ADU, kind of like what you're seeing in this image here in the backyard, if you want to build one that's new, it needs to be 5 feet from any property line. That is different from relaxing side yard requirements overall, right? Side yard requirements in certain districts are going to be slightly relaxed. They might be, and we'll talk about that in district fixes, which is a different thing. But that's not exactly the same as saying that an ADU needs to be set back 5 feet, because side yards are, if one wanted to expand their home and not build an ADU, they just want to do something to their home, the side yard requirements stay there, and they're different than the 5 foot from a lot line requirements for ADUs. I hope that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it does. We'll take one more question from Lance Tuckle.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Okay, can I add an ADU to my home by enclosing my porch and or adding 2 stories above the enclosed porch?
No, no. David, do you know about any kind of porch requirements there? I believe we have some typology.
Yeah, I can jump in. So whether or not it's a porch is kind of moot for this proposal. It's really just about whether or not it meets kind of the regulations in the ADU. So really, I guess the short answer is it depends on the scenario. The long answer is that you could build an ADU within, certain regulations. They could be attached, but even attached ADUs kind of, to my understanding, have those same requirements and regulations as detached ADUs. So for a height purposes, I believe, if it's not a conversion and it's like new exterior construction, right, then that would need to be a maximum of 2 stories or 25 feet in height. That's the same regulation that we have for any ADU that is being like an exterior addition of some sort, whether it's detached or attached. And then it would need to still meet, the other guidelines of the ADUs. It would still, to my understanding, need to be at least 5 feet from a setback. But again, I do defer to, it really does depend on the scenario, the district, et cetera. And if you want to contact us after the fact, let us know your property and kind of where it is. We'd be happy to give you more detail.
Okay, are you going to be providing contact information so we could specifically write to a specific individual?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you.
Okay. Just a time check. It's 7:39. We have a lot to get through, so if we can, move a little bit faster, I think. We can move on to the next one.
Yeah. So the rule changes that allow ADUs can also help homeowners who don't want to add an ADU but need more flexibility to adapt or renovate their homes to meet their needs. Our research shows that many existing buildings are out of compliance, meaning they're not in line with today's rules. For example, R41 districts are 2-family districts allowing semi-detached buildings like the ones you see in the photo. But buildings like these pre-1961 duplexes could not be constructed today because they have more square footage than what is currently allowed, and their rear yard is too small. These non-compliances cause big headaches for homeowners, as you know, if they need to borrow money from the bank or if they want to make simple changes to their home, like renovating an outdated kitchen. The proposal would fix these rules, which would have dual benefits. First, homeowners of existing buildings won't run into issues when they go to make an alteration to their building because the zoning would better match what's actually on the ground. Second, you'll actually be able to build 2-family homes in 2-family districts or a multifamily home in a multifamily district, when today the only thing that would be feasible is a single-family home. So just to put a finer point on it, the zoning district allows you to build multifamily homes, 2-family homes, but because of a variety of intersecting and log-jammed kind of rules that were implemented over the years, you're not actually able to do it in practice.
Thank you very much. Any questions on district fixes? I have one to kick us off. We have a special permit district that goes through BSA approval for enlargement of a single family home. So from reading the resolution, it looks as though that this will no longer go through BSA and the default will be an FAR of 1. Is that correct? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, so that's something that we've heard from many residents in CB14 as well as the other districts in that it's permitted. Is that folks have wanted to expand their homes. We said, okay, you can expand your homes with a BSA permit. Waited a couple more years. Folks said this BSA permit is way too onerous. And so we said, okay, well, we could provide a moderate FAR increase as of right. And so basically we're removing that requirement. And in certain areas in CB14, you would have a 1.0 FAR regardless of the underlying FAR requirements in the underlying district.
Great. Just want a clarification on what the future looks like if this passes. Thank you. I'm just going to quickly check the chat. Would there be any requirement to maintain the existing look from the front of the building house in non-landmark districts?
The zoning resolution can govern the height and bulk and setbacks and other rules like that, but it can't govern, for example, the facade materials or the design of the aesthetic character of the front of the house.
Okay. Thank you. We can move on to the next one.
All right, so we're moving on to some of the medium and high density proposals. Now, the highest density is not applicable to CB14, but certainly some of those medium density proposals are. So we're going to talk now about universal affordability preference. The UAP would allow apartment buildings to be at least 20% larger, so long as all the extra space is occupied by permanently affordable or supportive housing. Now, the context here is that already in many parts of the city, in these higher density areas, the current rules allow for bigger buildings for affordable senior housing. UAP would allow incremental housing growth in neighborhood and encourage affordable housing throughout the city rather than concentrated in a few neighborhoods. So the advantage you get right now for building for seniors, that 20% larger building kind of floor area that you get for participating in the AIRS program, you would now get for providing low income or affordable units or income restricted units. So are there any questions about that?
Let me see.
And you can see kind of where some of those areas would be in 14.
We have a question from board member Elizabeth Denise.
Hi, thank you so much for this presentation and this opportunity to ask this question. I'm sorry if this is a little wonky. I'm trying to make it as clear as possible. One of the things I've kind of noticed about a lot of areas kind of where this is not in our district is that the buildings are often, especially along like Coney Island Avenue near where I live, new buildings are often like a little smaller than some existing buildings kind of nearby. And many of them have not, they're all not in MIH required locations, and many of them have done some new construction by right, often in like R7A or something, and none of them have taken advantage of the voluntary inclusionary housing program we currently have, and so neighbors and folks have been very concerned that there isn't new affordable apartments that would go through Housing Connect and so forth on them. And I just was wondering if you had a sense of like if people who have, are making these developments, like have I'm trying to think the right way to word this, because I know some of it is hard because, a lot of developments just never get off the ground or never consider changes because the ULERT process takes a lot of time and costs a lot of money. But I was wondering if something like, if we think that this would help create that, and if buildings would pencil out like well within our district to go from something that's like, an R7A building that's like 6 stories at like kind of at bulk, and then a little bit more to having a few more apartments that would be affordable and like largely staying in, what still seems like the same thing, or if people are not going to be able to take advantage of it for like small zoning boosts. I don't know if that made sense. Please ask for clarification if needed.
Yeah, it's a good segue into kind of mentioning that the affordability requirement for UAP would be 60%. That's income averaging. So that means that the average of the units, that the affordable units would have to average out to be 60% of AMI. There are many factors that lead to whether housing is actually produced or not, whether it's feasible for developers to create or not. But what we're hoping, what we're anticipating is that by establishing this rule all over the city in all of our medium and high density districts, we will produce a lot of housing kind of citywide, even if it is not feasible in some specific areas with kind of a smaller kind of footprint and so on. But the key here is that it is mandatory to make those units affordable if you want to take advantage of the program. So it's not like VIH in that way. And the depth of affordability is actually higher than VIH. So VIH has got that 80% with no income averaging. Here UAP will give you 60% with the income averaging. So give you a sense of kind of what the incomes look like for folks that are taking advantage of those bands. Now, is a developer going to build one of these in one of the medium and high density areas of CB14 specifically? Time will tell. But certainly getting zoning out of the way and allowing it, we think is a big advantage of the program.
Yeah, and Elizabeth, I think really, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the bulk of the question really there is, are people going to take advantage of this? Right? Like that's kind of what I heard from your question. Is that kind of generally where you're going at?
Yeah.
Yep, understood. That's a really good question. And to be frank, a lot of it does depend on subsidy, right? And so with the expiration of 421A, really we thought, without a replacement 421A, this would primarily benefit 100% affordable developments, which is still a great thing. When it comes to mixed income buildings, we'll be frank and say a lot of it does depend on a replacement from 421A, which luckily there is one proposed at the state level. And so we do think that given all of that put together with some subsidy for mixed income buildings, that we think this could be taken advantage of quite a bit.
Thank you. So we can go ahead and move on to the next. We're on to citywide, aren't we?
Yes. The last thing I'll say about UAP before we move on to answer the question kind of even further is that had we had this in place since 2014, we would have had an additional 20,000 income restricted homes throughout the city. All right. So we will continue. Just quickly, there's one more here on updates to MIH before we go to citywide. So mandatory inclusionary housing areas would remain in place and continue to be mapped where there's a significant increases in residential density. So that's just something to be mindful of. Some of the MIH FARs would be raised to meet UAP FARs. So that's like important as well. The current MIH program is incompatible with tools that facilitate affordable home ownership. This proposal would exempt 100% affordable home ownership projects from rules that prevent them from penciling out. I'm hearing a little bit of an echo, so if somebody has a...
There, we got it.
Okay, got it. All right, so we'll move on to the citywide proposals. So parking proposal, it's a large one. It's a citywide proposal. It's going to impact kind of new construction almost everywhere. Parking would be optional for new housing everywhere. And that follows the example of many other large cities throughout the country. Today, New York City requires new housing to include off-street parking, even where it's not needed. The mandates mean less space for housing and increased construction costs, which result in less housing being built. The diagram you see here represents how parking takes up a lot of space. 2 parking spaces equivalent to about the size of a studio apartment. Building parking itself is also very expensive. It's often subterranean. It's an obstacle to new housing growth, especially affordable housing. The proposal prioritizes housing over parking. Parking would still be allowed, and we would anticipate that developers will respond to market needs and continue to provide parking in areas where there is a demand. But removing parking mandates can help reduce the cost of housing construction and enable the development of more homes in each new building. I'll give you a real-world example of kind of how this plays out. Lifting parking mandates can support housing growth. If you see the developer here, this underutilized lot, it's in a great location near transit, and they want to build an apartment building. The lot, for example, could accommodate 16 homes, but the developer stops at just 10 homes. So they can waive out of the parking requirements. Because as soon as they add the 11th apartment, they would need to provide 6 parking spaces. So by eliminating the parking mandate, the developer can fully build out the lot to include those additional 6 apartments. Now, as with all the proposals, 6 additional units may not seem like a lot, but when hundreds of sites across the city are able to build more housing, that incremental change results in a lot more housing citywide. So happy to answer questions about parking.
Any questions about parking? Let me just quickly check the chat. We'll get back to the question about city council at the end of the presentation. I don't see any questions if you want to go ahead and continue. Oh, Greg Alvarez, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question. You mentioned that there are obviously other cities that are experimenting with this as well. Have there been any studies or results showing positive outcomes from eliminating parking? Any preliminary data to see what effects it's been having on other cities? Thank you.
I'm not sure about the impact. We know that cities across the country are kind of doing this. But I can get back to you on kind of what the data is saying regarding the impact of lifting those mandates.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll add in, to amend, this isn't just us following a trend of other cities. We do want to make sure that what we're doing actually makes sense, and regardless of just, we're not jumping off the bridges because everyone else is doing it, A number of other cities have implemented these. Some have done so recently, but a lot have done so quite a few years ago. San Francisco is one that eliminated its parking minimums in 2018, I believe. I think it was, it was a big issue. It was a big conversation about what's going on. I actually worked for the city of San Francisco up until about 2021. And by the time I left, I really didn't hear much conversation about it. What I did see is something that I think, given our evidence in Brooklyn, we anticipate seeing here, which is that people will provide parking to the extent they need to actually market their units, right? The same way that certain developers add in other amenities such as, fancy rooftop spaces or in-unit gyms or bike parking spaces. If I'm a developer and I'm building in a place that is nowhere near transit, or that is likely to house folks who are members of communities that have limitations on using transit, or what so be it, many times they have, in Brooklyn and in other cities, have chosen to provide those parking spaces anyway. Right? All we're doing is saying you actually are not required to. And what this is targeted at are those buildings that we see in Brooklyn and elsewhere in the city, in which they're near transit. They have a population of people, many of whom don't even own cars, where they have to build all these parking spaces. And when you actually look at the parking spaces, a lot of them are empty. It just is something that's included in your unit, whether or not you need it or not. And what that is parking. Pardon?
Thank you. I'm just trying to move us forward. Greg, did that answer your question?
Yes, that's sufficient for now. Thank you.
Okay, then quick question. If a developer decides that they do want to continue adding parking into their development, is that included in the FAR?
The rules, no, it is not.
So
is that right?
So the FAR for the parking spaces that they are optioning in that are not required, under this new resolution will also be exempt of the FAR. So there's not a lot of incentive then to not put them in, especially if they're renting them out to the community, which most places do.
Yes, my understanding that the right now, if you're under a certain amount of units, for example, you can waive out of parking. So now that number of units that allows you to waive out of parking is kind of any number of units. You can waive out of park. You're not required to provide the parking, but the parking doesn't count towards your total FAR, if I'm not mistaken. David, does that sound right to you?
I believe that's the case. But what it is that parking is really expensive to build, and those prices are passed through in rents.
Yeah.
Is what we see a lot of time. And of course, with the example here, even if it's not a direct spatial, comparison where you would have parking, now you have a unit, although sometimes that could be the case. What you do see is people declining to build an additional unit or an additional 3 or 5 or 10 units that they could build because it would require them to add all this parking that may or may not actually go to use.
I'll circle back and I'll put this question in a more concise form in an email, because I don't think you're understanding my point and what the real world is. And if you're going to go so far to end parking mandates, then you should, if someone opts to put them into a building because it is a moneymaker for them, that it should count towards the FAR. That's what I'm saying. But I'll put that in an email. We could talk about that offline.
Understood.
Yeah. We can move on to why don't we do the next 3? Because there's not a whole lot for us in this district, except for maybe campus infill.
Yeah, and these are basically the last 3. So there's some additional proposals. There are some outdated rules that prevent underused non-residential buildings like offices from converting to housing. Many buildings were constructed after 1961. They're located outside the city's large office centers. They cannot be converted to housing currently. So it would make it easier for those buildings, such as offices, to be converted to housing. We'd make a few changes to the adaptive reuse regulations. They would expand the regulations citywide to go beyond office districts. A broader range, as a result, of underused buildings like vacant schools or former religious buildings could be converted to housing. The second proposal would move the eligibility cutoff date from 1961 or 1977 to 1991. That would allow more recently constructed buildings to be converted into housing. Third, the proposal would enable conversions to all types of housing, including supportive housing, shared housing, and dorms. As shown in the second image, the proposal would also allow small and shared apartments by eliminating the dwelling unit factor. That's a measure of the minimum average unit size in areas with good transit access. This would provide more housing opportunities for New Yorkers who want to live alone, but do not have that option today. We currently force too many people who want to live alone to find roommates and occupy family-sized units in many parts of the city. Enabling more small and shared apartments can relieve some of that pressure. And finally, previous developments often took place under tower in the park style regulations called height factor. DCP has developed a more recent set of regulations for contextual buildings that have height limits and result in better designs. Some sites like NYCHA campuses can't access those new rules. The proposed changes would allow height limited infill on sites that would otherwise be forced to develop tall, skinny buildings or nothing at all. So those are kind of the three additional kind of proposals. They don't map as cleanly onto CB14, but they will provide for housing opportunities outside in other parts of the city. It's going to have an impact on housing kind of availability everywhere.
Great. Are there any questions? Oh, I see a question from District Manager Sean Campbell. Go ahead.
Thank you. This is sort of a question that's general or pertinent to a lot of what was presented tonight. And I'm wondering if there's been an analysis at DCP about to consider the number of developments that would have fewer than 6 units and therefore not be subject to rent stabilization.
Okay.
It just seems to me that this incentivizes a lot of, like you said, a little bit of additional housing throughout the city. So when you have little bits of little bit, I'm concerned about the rent stabilization.
Yeah, it's a good point, and there's definitely trade-offs. A proposal that it encourages or allows for lots of housing everywhere and larger buildings is going to generate much more agita. A proposal that allows a little bit more housing everywhere is a proposal that's kind of more likely to achieve the kind of consensus that's required for something like this to ultimately pass and become a part of our sort of housing infrastructure in the city. But it's definitely a good point and noted.
I just want to make a comment on small and shared housing. So 2 comments is what we hear mostly when ULARP applications come to this board and residents look at the mix of unit sizes is that they feel defeated that there aren't enough family-sized units. And so encouraging studio and 1 bedrooms, which will increase the amount of units that you can put into small buildings, may not be meeting the needs of everyone. Maybe in certain parts of Manhattan, that's meeting needs. But in this community, we've heard more often than not that family-sized units, so that people can live together comfortably, are important. And then the other comment about small and shared housing is a trend that I see of, for example, there is a company in Brooklyn that operates 10 cohabitation buildings. So these buildings were originally, the building has 4 units in it, and those units were 3 bedrooms each. The company took over the building, renovated, made each unit into 4 bedrooms, and rents each of those bedrooms out to individuals. So they're doing exactly what you want to make permissible in this this resolution. However, the people that are living there are paying $1,700 for a 64 square foot bedroom. That's right, I said 64 square feet. So when you combine the amount of rents from the 4 bedrooms, it comes to somewhere about $5,500 a month per unit, where in comparison, a 3-bedroom in Bed-Stuy would be $3,800 if it was straight. So that's the thing that I just want to, make you aware of is I know that planning doesn't have a lot to do with the end use, but if you make these items permissible and make more of them, then that's not exactly affordable housing. It might be affordable for that person at that time for what they can afford, but it's not a good bargain. It's really not affordable. Anyway, that's one thing that I noticed and read through a lot of this.
It's definitely a problem. If there is a lot, if certain housing typology is permitted, then we will see people who want to live alone, sort of live in these sort of studio environments, and there'll be more of them. If we don't allow them, there's also the trade-off of people, living in an existing, single-family home, and then just 4 or 5 roommates together. So either way, it's challenging. Zoning wants to allow for a housing typology just to add to the diversity of options that we have in the city. But noted on your concern.
Thank you. Elizabeth, did you have a question on these last 3 citywide amendments, or are you going to make a comment about what I have?
It's a follow-up to your question.
We're not doing follow-ups to questions.
It's a question for DCP about your question.
Okay.
I was wondering if DCP has any stats on how many single people are living with roommates throughout the city or in our district, because I know it's a really big amount taking up, larger units. I think not to say that there isn't a desire for new construction to also have those larger units, but just to get a better understanding of where we are.
I can see if we have stats, not on my top of my head, but we can see if there's some type of research or that's been done on that. We can circle up.
Great. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here and giving us this presentation and allowing everyone on the call to think a little bit more about this and for answering our questions so that we can go into the public hearing, which will be to be confirmed June 10th, where we will see you again and we will take public comments and be able to determine how this board will make a recommendation to DCP and CPC. Greg, did you have anything else you wanted to add before I close the meeting?
No, I don't think so. I know Sean wants to maybe say, I see you're jumping in though. Is that about the date?
I think the tentative date is June 11th, but again, yes, to be confirmed.
Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. And if we missed anybody's questions, you know, we'll take a look. We're keeping the chat and we'll be looking at your comments, you know, as we move on to preparing for the public hearing.
And people should certainly feel free to keep emailing the office. We are collecting the comments that have come into the office.
Yes, thank you.
And I just want to say, I apologize. I was kicked off my internet for a second, so I hope I didn't miss anything too much. But you can always email us questions.
No, we were thanking you. Thank you, David. Thank you, Hanif. Thank you. Thank you for everyone for being on this call. We look forward to seeing you at our next meeting when we discuss this further.
And sorry, the lights went off in our office, so I look like I'm in.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time and have a good night. This this Housing and Land Use Committee meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thanks all.